I think I didn't do anything wrong, just acted on what everyone secretly wants sometimes. Still, I never expected to find a thick envelope of divorce papers on the kitchen table, my own name spelled out in cold legal print. It's strange how one decision, one night, can turn into the only thing anyone remembers about you. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. My name is Morwenna Leigh. Well, it was Lee Graham until recently. I'm 32, work as an office administrator, and until 6 months ago, I thought I had a pretty decent life. A husband who taught high school English, a 7-year-old daughter named Penny, and a 3-bedroom house in the suburbs with an open-plan kitchen that looked straight out of a home design magazine. But decent isn't exciting, is it? And excitement was exactly what I was missing. The problem with Elliot wasn't that he was cruel or abusive. That would have made things simpler, given me a clearer villain to point to. No, Elliot's crime was being predictably, suffocatingly ordinary. Every evening he'd come home with a stack of papers to grade, kiss me on the forehead like I was his elderly aunt, and disappear into his study until bedtime. He never listens, I told my mother June over coffee one Tuesday morning. Always grading papers, always tired. It's like living with a ghost. June clicked her tongue sympathetically. Men don't understand that women need attention, darling. Your father was the same way before I set him straight. What I didn't mention was that Elliot had been working late because 3 of his colleagues had quit mid-semester, leaving him to cover extra classes. Or that when he did try to talk to me about his day, I usually had my phone out, scrolling through social media. Details like that would have complicated the narrative I was building. At home, the tension was becoming impossible to ignore. Even 7-year-old Penny had started picking up on it, drawing pictures of our family, where the parents stood on opposite sides of the paper, a careful distance between them. "Why does Daddy look sad?" she asked one evening, holding up a crayon drawing of Elliot with down-turned eyes. "Daddy's just tired from work, sweetheart," I said. But even as I said it, I felt a pang of something. Guilt, maybe, though I pushed it down quickly. Elliot's mother, Linda, had never particularly liked me, and my complaints about her son's emotional distance only made things worse. During family dinners, she'd watch me with those sharp gray eyes of hers, as if she could see right through my carefully constructed grievances. "Marriage takes work from both sides," she said pointedly one Sunday, after I'd made another comment about Elliot's late nights at school. "Of course it does," I replied sweetly, though inside I was seething. Easy for her to say. She'd had a husband who worshipped the ground she walked on. It was during this period of domestic dissatisfaction that Jazz started texting me more frequently. Jasper Coulson had been Elliot's friend since college, charming in that effortless way some men have, with dark hair that always looked perfectly tousled and a smile that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. The texts started innocently enough, jokes, memes, casual conversation. But gradually, they became more frequent, more personal, and I found myself looking forward to them in a way that should have been a warning sign. One night, as Elliot graded papers in his study and Penny slept peacefully in her room, my phone buzzed with a message from Jazz. "You up?" I stared at the screen for a long moment, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. Outside, rain drummed against the windows, and the house felt smaller than usual, like the walls were closing in. I typed back, "Unfortunately, yes. Can't sleep. Want some company? I'm just around the corner." My heart started beating faster. This was crossing a line, and we both knew it. But as I sat there in my perfectly appointed living room, surrounded by the trappings of my perfectly ordinary life, I felt a thrill I hadn't experienced in years. "Elliot's home," I typed. "I know a place." I looked toward the study, where I could see the glow of Elliot's desk lamp under the door. He'd be in there for hours, lost in his students' essays about symbolism in The Great Gatsby. He probably wouldn't even notice if I left. "Give me 20 minutes," I replied, my finger hitting send before I could change my mind. As I crept upstairs to change clothes and fix my makeup, I told myself this was harmless. Just drinks with a friend, just a little excitement to break up the monotony. Elliot had driven me to this with his neglect, his emotional absence. Really, when you thought about it, this was his fault. I slipped out through the back door, my keys muffled in my palm, and drove into the night with my phone glowing on the passenger seat and my conscience carefully locked away. The bar Jazz had chosen was across town, dimly lit, the kind of place where you could sit in a corner booth and not worry about running into anyone you knew, or so I thought. "You look amazing," Jazz said when I walked in, and I felt that familiar flutter of validation. When was the last time Elliot had looked at me like that? When was the last time he'd noticed what I was wearing at all? We talked for hours, or rather, I talked, and Jazz listened with the kind of focused attention I'd been craving. He laughed at my jokes, asked follow-up questions, made me feel witty and interesting in a way I'd almost forgotten I could be. "Elliot doesn't know how lucky he is," Jazz said, his hand brushing mine across the table. "I don't think he sees me anymore," I replied, and in that moment, it felt completely true. I'm just part of the furniture. What happened next felt inevitable, though I suppose it wasn't really. Jazz suggested we go back to his apartment, and I said yes. We had sex on his unmade bed while rain continued to fall outside, and for those few hours I felt alive again. Afterward, as I lay in his arms, I told myself this was exactly what I'd needed. A reminder that I was still desirable, still capable of inspiring passion. It was just one night, just a bit of fun. No one would get hurt, but Jazz was careless in ways I hadn't anticipated. The next week, when we met for coffee, he was openly affectionate, touching my arm, leaning in close, laughing too loudly at my stories. I noticed other patrons glancing our way, and my stomach clenched with anxiety. "We should be more careful," I murmured. "Relax," he said, kissing my cheek as he left. "Life's too short to worry about everything." Easy for him to say. He wasn't the one with a marriage and child to protect. At work, I confided in my colleague Molly Chan, though I was careful about how much I revealed. "I've been spending time with an old friend," I told her over lunch. "Just as friends, you know, but it's nice to have someone to talk to." Molly raised an eyebrow. "Just friends?" "Of course," I said quickly. "I'm married." But Molly had always been perceptive, and I could see the wheels turning in her head. Still, she was my friend. She wouldn't say anything. The affair continued for several weeks. Jazz and I would meet at his apartment, at hotels, once memorably in his car parked behind a shopping center. Each time, I told myself it was the last time, that I'd gotten whatever this was out of my system. But the guilt was harder to manage than I'd expected. At home, Penny seemed more anxious than usual, asking why Mommy was going out so much in the evenings, and Elliot, while still distant, had started looking at me with a puzzled expression, as if he was trying to solve a problem he couldn't quite identify. "Everything okay?" he asked one morning, finding me staring at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. "Fine," I said. "Just tired." He nodded, but I caught him watching me more carefully after that. His brother Will, who'd always been protective of Elliot, seemed suspicious too. During a family barbecue, I caught him studying a photo on someone's phone with a frown. "What's so interesting?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. "Nothing," Will said, but he pocketed the phone quickly. My mother June, meanwhile, remained firmly in my corner, though she didn't know the full extent of what was happening. "You deserve to be happy," she told me during one of our coffee dates. "If Elliot can't see what a treasure he has, that's his loss." "I'm not sure it's that simple, Mum." "Nonsense. You're a beautiful, intelligent woman in your prime. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise." Her words were like permission, and I clung to them when the guilt threatened to overwhelm me. But secrets have a way of revealing themselves, especially when you're not as careful as you should be. One evening, as I was getting out of my car after meeting Jazz, I felt something crunch under my foot. Looking down, I saw one of my earrings, a small silver hoop that must have fallen out during our earlier encounter in his car. I picked it up and tossed it onto the passenger seat, thinking nothing of it. It wasn't until the next morning that I realized it was gone. Elliot was making coffee in the kitchen, humming quietly to himself. The first time I'd heard him do that in months. When he saw me, he smiled, and for a moment, he looked like the man I'd married. "Sleep well?" he asked. "Like a baby," I lied, accepting the cup he offered me. But as I watched him move around the kitchen, I noticed something different in his demeanor. He seemed lighter somehow, more purposeful, and when he kissed my forehead goodbye, I could have sworn I saw something glinting in his jacket pocket. Something small and silver and familiar. The family dinner was supposed to be a celebration, Elliot's father Rob's birthday, with both sides of the family gathered around our dining room table. Linda had made her famous roast beef, June had brought wine, and Penny was excited to have all her grandparents in one place. But I was on edge. Jazz had been distant lately, taking longer to reply to my texts, making excuses when I suggested meeting up. And Elliot had been acting strangely too, not confrontational, but watchful, as if he was waiting for something. The conversation over dinner was stilted, full of the kind of polite small talk that happens when people are trying too hard to get along. Linda asked about my work, June complimented the house, and Rob told the same stories he always told about his army days. It was when we were clearing the dishes that things went sideways. "Morwenna's been working so hard lately," June said, patting my arm. "Out at all hours, networking and such." "Networking?" Will asked, and there was something sharp in his tone that made everyone look up. "Yes, well, you know how it is in business," I said quickly. "Sometimes you have to put in the extra effort." "Must be exhausting," Linda said dryly. "All that effort." I felt my temper flare. Here we were, trying to have a nice family dinner, and Linda couldn't resist her little digs. Fine. If she wanted to play games, I could play too. "It is exhausting," I said, settling back into my chair with my wine glass. "Especially when you're not getting any support at home." The table went quiet. Elliot looked up from the plates he was stacking, his expression unreadable. "What do you mean?" Rob asked, though his tone suggested he really didn't want to know. "Oh, just that some husbands are better at, shall we say, satisfying their wives' needs than others." I took a sip of wine, enjoying the shocked expressions around the table. "It's amazing how creative you have to get when your partner is more interested in his students' essays than his own wife." June laughed, a sharp sound that cut through the silence. "Men never understand what women need, do they?" But no one else was laughing. Will's face had gone red, and he pushed back from the table so hard his chair scraped against the floor. "Are you serious right now?" he demanded. "Will," Elliot said quietly, but his brother ignored him. "You're going to sit there and humiliate my brother in front of his own daughter?" I glanced toward the living room where Penny was playing with her toys, hopefully out of earshot. "I'm not humiliating anyone. I'm just being honest about the challenges in our marriage." "Challenges?" Linda's voice was ice cold. "Is that what we're calling it?" Something in her tone made my stomach clench, but I pressed on. "Marriage is hard work, Linda. I'm sure you remember." "I remember being loyal to my husband," she snapped. "I remember not airing our private business in front of the whole family. Maybe if Elliot paid half as much attention to me as he does to his precious students." "Stop!" Elliot's voice cut through my words like a blade. He was standing now, his hands braced against the back of his chair, and when he looked at me, his eyes were harder than I'd ever seen them. "Just stop." The room fell silent, except for the sound of Penny's toys in the next room and the tick of the grandfather clock in the corner. "Elliot," I started, but he held up a hand. "No." Not another word. He looked around the table at our assembled family members, his gaze lingering on each face before returning to mine. "I think it's time for everyone to go home." Will was already reaching for his jacket. "Come on, Mum. We don't need to listen to this." "Will, wait!" I called after him, but he was already heading for the door. "You should be ashamed of yourself," he said, without turning around. Linda followed him, pausing only to kiss Elliot's cheek and whisper something in his ear that made his jaw tighten. Rob gathered up June's coat and purse with the efficiency of a man who'd learned to navigate his wife's social disasters. "Perhaps we should call it an early night," he said diplomatically. After they left, the house felt hollow and too quiet. Penny had disappeared upstairs, probably sensing the tension even if she hadn't heard the specifics. Elliot was in the kitchen, methodically loading the dishwasher with his back to me. "That was just a joke," I said finally. "You know that, right? I was just trying to lighten the mood." He didn't answer, didn't even acknowledge that I'd spoken. "Elliot, come on. You're being too sensitive." Still nothing. "Fine," I snapped. "Be dramatic. See if I care." But as I watched him finish cleaning up, moving with the same quiet efficiency he brought to everything, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn weather outside. When he was done, he walked past me without a word, heading for his study. I heard the door close, then the unmistakable sound of the lock turning. He'd never locked his study door before, not once in all our years of marriage. The fallout from the dinner party was swift and brutal. Will stopped returning my calls entirely. Linda, who had never been warm toward me, now treated me with open contempt during the few unavoidable family interactions. Even Rob, usually the peacemaker, seemed uncomfortable around me. At work, things weren't much better. Molly cornered me by the coffee machine on Monday morning, her expression more serious than I'd ever seen it. "We need to talk," she said, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "About what?" "About the rumors going around. People are saying you're having an affair." My blood went cold. "That's ridiculous. Who's saying that?" "Does it matter? The point is, people are talking, and some of them are talking to HR. I felt like the floor was shifting beneath my feet. "What are they saying exactly?" "That you've been seen around town with some guy who isn't your husband. That you've been taking long lunches, leaving early, acting secretive." Molly's voice was gentle but firm. "Morwenna, if there's any truth to this, you need to be careful. The company has strict policies about conduct that reflects poorly on the organization." "There's no truth to it," I said automatically, though my voice sounded hollow even to my own ears. Molly studied my face for a long moment. "Okay," she said finally, "but maybe you should think about how your actions might be perceived. Appearances matter, whether we like it or not." That evening, I tried calling Jazz, but he didn't pick up. I sent several texts throughout the day, each one more desperate than the last, but his responses were terse and noncommittal. Finally, late that night, he sent a message that made my heart sink. "We should cool it for a while. Things are getting complicated." Complicated. As if our relationship was just an inconvenience he could set aside when it became troublesome. At home, the atmosphere was becoming unbearable. Elliot spoke to me only when necessary, and even then, his responses were polite but distant. Penny, sensitive to the tension, had started having nightmares and asking if Mommy and Daddy were going to get divorced, like her friend Emma's parents. "Of course not, sweetheart," I assured her, though the words felt like lies on my tongue. Linda had convinced Elliot to spend a night at her house, ostensibly to help her with some home repairs, but I knew it was really to get him away from me. When he came back the next day, he seemed more resolved somehow, as if the time away had clarified something for him. "We need to talk," he said, finding me in the kitchen making breakfast. "About what?" I asked, though I had a sinking feeling I already knew. "About us. About what's been happening." I felt a spike of panic. "Nothing's been happening, Elliot. I don't know what you think." "Please don't lie to me anymore," he said quietly. "I think we've both had enough of that." There was something in his tone that stopped me cold. Not anger exactly, but a kind of weary resignation that was somehow worse. "I don't know what you want me to say. I want you to tell me the truth, about where you've been going, about who you've been seeing." My mind raced, trying to calculate how much he actually knew versus how much he suspected. "I haven't been seeing anyone. I've been working, trying to advance my career, and I'm sorry if that's been hard on our family, but—" "Morwenna." He said my name like a sigh. "I found your earring." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What earring?" "The silver hoop. In your car, on the passenger seat, after one of your late-night work meetings." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the small piece of jewelry, holding it up between us like evidence in a trial. "The same earring that wasn't there when you left the house that evening." I stared at the earring, my mind scrambling for an explanation that would make sense. I must have taken it off in the car. Sometimes they bother me when I'm driving. "Both of them? What? You took off both earrings? Because you were wearing both when you left, and this is the only one I found." I felt trapped, caught in a web of small details I hadn't thought to manage. I don't remember. Maybe I lost the other one somewhere." Elliot looked at me for a long moment, and I could see something dying in his eyes. "Okay," he said finally, "if that's the story you want to stick with." He pocketed the earring and walked away, leaving me standing alone in the kitchen with my heart pounding and my carefully constructed world crumbling around me. That night, I came home from another unsuccessful attempt to reach Jazz to find Elliot's study empty. His laptop was gone, along with several files and folders I'd seen him working with recently. When I asked him about it, he said he was taking some work to school, but something in his manner suggested it was more than that. "Are you moving your office?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. "Something like that," he replied, and I knew with cold certainty that he was preparing for something I wasn't going to like. The mediation office was sterile and impersonal, with beige walls and fluorescent lighting that made everyone look slightly ill. I sat across from Elliot at a conference table that felt as wide as an ocean, our respective lawyers flanking us like soldiers preparing for battle. I'd hoped we could work this out privately, that whatever crisis of confidence Elliot was having would pass without involving outsiders. But when I'd come home 3 days earlier to find him packing a suitcase, I realized the situation had moved beyond my control. "I've filed for divorce," he'd said without preamble. "My lawyer will be in touch." "Elliot, please, can't we talk about this like adults? We tried talking, you lied. I never lied to you." He'd looked at me then, with something approaching pity. "Morwenna, you've been lying to me for months. To me, to Penny, to both our families. I think you've been lying for so long you don't even know what the truth looks like anymore." Now, sitting in this awful room with its motivational posters about finding common ground, I was determined to make him see reason. "This is all a terrible misunderstanding," I said, as the mediator shuffled through her papers. "We love each other. We have a child together. Surely we can work through whatever problems we're having." Elliot's lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia Wells, opened a folder and began laying out documents on the table. "Mrs. Graham, my client has prepared a comprehensive timeline of your extramarital relationship, including supporting evidence. Perhaps you'd like to review it before we proceed." My stomach dropped as I looked at the papers spread before me. There were printouts of text messages, my text messages to Jazz, with timestamps and phone numbers clearly visible. Bank statements showing cash withdrawals on dates that corresponded with our meetings. Even a photograph, grainy but unmistakable, of Jazz and me leaving his apartment building together. "Where did you get these?" I demanded. "Phone records are available through legal channels when there's cause," Patricia replied calmly, "as are financial records for joint accounts. The photograph was taken by a private investigator." "You had me followed?" I turned to Elliot, genuinely shocked. "You actually hired someone to spy on me?" "I hired someone to document what you were doing," he said quietly, "because I knew you'd never tell me the truth." I felt cornered, desperate. "It was just one night," I said, grasping for any argument that might minimize the damage. "One mistake. People make mistakes, Elliot. That doesn't mean we have to throw away our entire marriage." Patricia consulted another document. "According to the evidence we've gathered, the relationship lasted approximately 2 months and involved at least 15 documented meetings." 15. Had it really been that many? Looking at the timeline they'd constructed, with dates and locations laid out in neat columns, I realized how calculated it all looked, how deliberate. "This is harassment," I said, my voice rising. "You can't just violate someone's privacy because you're feeling insecure about your marriage." "Mrs. Graham," the mediator interjected gently, "perhaps we should focus on moving forward constructively." But I wasn't ready to be constructive. I was angry now. Angry at being ambushed. Angry at having my private business laid out like evidence at a crime scene. "You want to know why I had an affair?" I said, looking directly at Elliot. "Because you stopped seeing me. You stopped caring about me as a woman, as a person. You turned me into just another piece of furniture in your perfect little life." Elliot's expression didn't change. "So this is my fault." "I'm not saying it's your fault, but you're saying it's my fault. I'm saying that marriages are complicated, and when one person's needs aren't being met, stop." His voice was quiet but firm. "Just stop." Patricia slid another document across the table. "We'd like to discuss custody arrangements." The custody agreement was brutal in its efficiency. Primary custody to Elliot, with supervised visitation for me pending evaluation by a family counselor. The house would be sold, assets divided according to state law. I would have limited contact with Penny until I completed a course of therapy and demonstrated stable decision-making patterns. "This is ridiculous," I said, my hands shaking as I read through the terms. "I'm her mother. You can't just take my daughter away from me because I made one mistake." 15 mistakes, Patricia corrected, over 2 months, while lying to your husband and manipulating your family members to take sides against him. The mediator looked uncomfortable. "Perhaps we should take a break and allow everyone to review these documents with their counsel." But as I looked around the table, at Elliot's calm, resolved expression, at the neat stacks of evidence documenting my betrayal, at the legal documents that would dissolve my marriage and reshape my life, I realized that the time for negotiation had passed. This wasn't a discussion. It was a sentencing. The house felt different when I walked through it for the last time. Empty, obviously, but more than that. It felt like a place I'd never really lived in at all. The walls that had once held family photos now showed pale rectangles where the pictures used to hang. The kitchen, where I'd made countless breakfasts and dinners, was reduced to bare counters and echoing cabinets. Elliot had been methodical about the division of property, as he was about everything else. I got half the furniture, half the dishes, half the books. But somehow, even with my share of our possessions, I felt like I was leaving with nothing that mattered. Linda had come to help Elliot and Penny pack, and she moved through the house with the quiet efficiency of someone who had been waiting for this day. She was polite to me, coldly, correctly polite, but her relief was palpable. "The movers will be here at 9, she told Elliot, not bothering to acknowledge my presence. Penny clung to her father, her small face pinched with confusion and fear. She'd been having nightmares since the separation began, and the family counselor had recommended maintaining as much routine as possible during the transition. "Will I still see Mommy?" she asked for the 100th time. Of course, sweetheart, Elliot said, smoothing her hair. We'll work out a schedule. But I knew what that schedule looked like. 2 hours every Saturday afternoon, supervised by a social worker until I completed my court-mandated therapy and proved I was a fit parent. The woman who had given birth to this child, who had nursed her through fevers and celebrated her first steps, was now considered a potential threat to her well-being. My mother, June, had rallied to my defense, of course, calling the custody arrangement barbaric and threatening to hire her own lawyer to fight it. But even her support felt hollow now, tainted by the knowledge that I'd been lying to her, too. "This is all so unfair," she'd said during one of our coffee meetings. "One little indiscretion and they're treating you like a criminal." One little indiscretion. Even June, my staunchest ally, was minimizing what I'd done rather than confronting it directly. My father, Rob, had been quieter about the whole situation, helping me pack my belongings with the same methodical care he brought to everything else. But I caught him looking at me sometimes with an expression I couldn't quite read, disappointment maybe, or just sadness at how everything had fallen apart. Jazz had disappeared entirely from my life, as if our months together had never happened. Mutual friends told me he'd started dating someone new, a teacher from Elliot's school, which felt like a particular cruelty. Molly at work had grown distant too, no longer inviting me to lunch or asking about my personal life. The affair had cost me more than my marriage. It had cost me my reputation, my friendships, my place in the social world I'd built over years. The final legal meeting was mercifully brief. Patricia Wells had drawn up all the paperwork, with her characteristic thoroughness, and there was little left to discuss. I signed where I was told to sign, initialed where I was told to initial, and watched my marriage dissolve into a stack of legal documents. "The custody schedule will begin next Saturday," Patricia informed me as we gathered our papers. "The supervisor will meet you at the family center at 2 o'clock. 2 o'clock on Saturday afternoons. That's what my relationship with my daughter had been reduced to. Elliot walked me to my car after the meeting, the first time we'd been alone together in weeks. "I never wanted it to end like this," I said, though I wasn't sure that was entirely true. "I know," he replied, and there was genuine sadness in his voice. "But I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. Penny deserves better than that. I'm still her mother. Yes, you are, and I hope someday you'll be the kind of mother she deserves." The words stung because they carried no malice, just a quiet certainty that I had failed in ways I was still learning to understand. As I drove away from the law office, I caught a glimpse of Elliot in my rearview mirror. He was standing on the sidewalk, checking his phone, and he looked lighter somehow, younger, like a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. My phone buzzed with a text message. For a wild moment, I thought it might be Jazz, or maybe Elliot having second thoughts. But it was from Patricia Wells's office. "Custody schedule attached. Please confirm receipt." I pulled over to read the attachment, though I already knew what it would say. 2 hours every Saturday. Supervised visits. Progress reviews every 3 months. The bureaucratic language of a broken family. I typed back, "received," and sat in my car for a long time, watching other people go about their normal lives, walking their dogs, pushing strollers, carrying groceries, people who had managed not to destroy everything they'd built. The apartment I'd rented was small and sterile, nothing like the home I'd shared with Elliot and Penny. As I unpacked my boxes of belongings, half of a life, carefully divided and cataloged, I tried to imagine what came next. I could fight the custody arrangement, spend thousands of dollars on lawyers and court battles. I could try to rebuild my reputation, find new friends, start over in a different city. I could even try to win Elliot back, though that seemed like the longest shot of all. Or I could finally do what everyone had been asking me to do from the beginning. Tell the truth. Not the version of events where I was the victim of an inattentive husband and a boring marriage, but the real truth about choices and consequences, about the difference between what we want and what we deserve. The truth was that I had destroyed my family for the sake of a few months of excitement with a man who had never promised me anything beyond those stolen hours in hotel rooms and his apartment. I had lied to everyone who loved me, manipulated family members into taking sides, and convinced myself that my unhappiness justified any action I chose to take. The truth was that Elliot had been a good husband, not perfect, but faithful and kind and devoted to our daughter, and I had repaid his loyalty with betrayal, his trust with deception. The truth was that I had gambled everything I had for something I didn't even really want, and now I was sitting alone in a half-empty apartment, wondering how I had managed to lose so completely. My phone buzzed again. Another message from the law office, confirming the details of my first supervised visit with Penny. 2 hours, every Saturday, in a sterile room with a social worker taking notes about whether I was fit to be alone with my own child. I thought it'd be funny to sleep with his friend. A little revenge for years of feeling neglected. A small rebellion against the predictability of suburban marriage. He thought it meant divorce. Turns out, we were both right. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next story. Write in the comments from which city you are watching.